Hello and welcome to Strip Panel Naked. I'm Haas and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. Horror comes down to pacing, mostly. Good horror is a masterclass in knowing how long to draw out a moment, when to push in, when to push out, when to linger, when to hurry, what to show and what to hide. Junji Ito is great at managing this, even in a medium where control of pace is notoriously difficult. There's one specific scene from Gyo in particular that I think is worthy of discussion. In fact, most of it is, but this one moment highlights an interesting use of creating a scary moment in comics, and it works quite differently than what I've shown last time with Chilling Adventures of Sabrina or Aliens Dead Orbit. It's actually somewhat closer to old Golden Age comics in how it utilizes the grid system to tell the story, a very specific, very superheroic 6-panel grid. Gyo tells a story about a bunch of dead animals that have essentially been affixed to these weird spindly legs. And in this scene, around 80 pages in, the main character is being chased by a giant shark that has been affixed to the legs. Obviously, there's an inherent fear in the oddness and grotesqueness of the way it's presented. You know, it's a shark attached to mechanical legs running on land and attacking these people. Of course, that's already pretty horrifying, but Ito builds a really great sequence across this single page with these 6 panels. And actually, that's the first point. A few pages before this, we see the shark break through into the building they're in, and we get a large bleed image of the shark, and it's rendered with a lot of lines, much more than we've typically seen in this world and these characters in the regular style of the book, and this becomes much of the style with Ito and his horror, in that the scary moments or figures are rendered with a lot more detail. It makes them feel slightly more lifelike than anything else, because with that detail sort of comes believability and reality. With much of the simplified faces in manga, you're going to go for the simplest way to convey simple loud emotions, reducing a full rendered face into something more akin to this. But here, Ito is really laying on the detail. If you watch the Strip Panel Naked episode on Akira Toriyama's Dr. Slump, you'll see I talked about a similar approach, but there it was used for comedy, and here it's used for this kind of aggressive realism. It's asking us as readers to really see how grotesque and scary this is. And it happens a lot too. A few pages later, the shark is close by again, and it's really rendered. Lots of lines, lots of detail on the mechanical legs, lots of work to show the curvature of the body, where again the human face reaction is quite simple, it's lacking the abundance of lines. So Ito is playing with the understanding of horror as a jump scare tactic, and actually he's reframing it more specifically as something akin to body horror. He's aware of the limitations of the medium he's working in, and sort of pushes this horror towards what he knows is achievable, which is really clever. Anyway, we lead up to the page I actually wanted to focus on, which is this sequence of the shark chasing the leads down this corridor. Now, the main point here is how it removes the need to change the panel layout significantly. If you watch a lot of this show and the previous sort of horror-themed episodes, there's a lot of changing up panel sizes to make a big moment even bigger, maybe even, a page turn to throw you off the scent, but Ito doesn't quite do that. He lays it all out on this page, and he keeps the panels, for the most part fairly uniform, even at least as to not be drawing attention to a change in the size of them. Instead, what he does is play around with the dimensions within those panels. You can see that the last 4 panels are essentially the exact same shot, and the first 2 panels utilize a very similar look to the last 4. So this page does 4 things and it does them really effectively, and they're all working towards the same goal. The first is those panels, which all have a singular vanishing point to lead your eye down the corridor. Ito is asking you to keep your eye on the shark each time, but by doing that you need to see the human in front first. And that's clever because it gives you story and placement of the lead so we know where he's at and we don't lose him, while keeping the emphasis all the time on the shark. Keep looking there. It also means you don't need to spend time wandering around the panel to understand everything. You pull directly to where you need to look by the vanishing point, because every line leads straight back to the shark. And the panels themselves are a little wide, they're not specifically narrow, but the world inside them starts to narrow down to the shark. So the visuals themselves limit what you can see from the scene, and actually that's really clever because it fills in the world around you, as in it doesn't rely on negative space within the page or anything like that. It fills the page with rendered imagery, but it uses the framing to draw you in. The world still exists, it's still complete, it's still believable, but you ignore it. It keeps the horror real by not limiting what we see, and grounding it in a very good sense of reality. And again, the realistic rendering of the shark is still there. The lead character maintains that simplified manga look, but the shark itself is fully rendered and covered in lines and detail. But the third thing it does is show very clearly the progression and movement of the shark. In the middle tier it's behind, getting stuck in the corner, and you see the progress it makes is quite limited. By the third panel it's moved a tiny little bit more, but then suddenly it's almost bursting out of the panel. And the bottom edge of the panel is extended out towards the bleed. If this was a 3D movie, this is the bit where the character tries to poke something in your eye. Also, interestingly, it's where we previously understood our main character to be. Which is the fourth thing the page does. If you notice in the middle tier, the vanishing point is ever so slightly off to the side of the panel, not the center. The character is placed in the foreground. So when we read this, we associate the shark with chasing the lead character. When he leaves the panel on the bottom tier, Ito places that vanishing point back in the middle of the panel. So what's the difference? Well, now the shark is actually aiming more at us than anything else. As the reader, we're now in its path, and by that final panel, it's almost jumping out at us, not anyone else. He's pulled us into the story as victims of the shark, unable to move out of the way of it. It's almost diving out of the page at us, and that's really, really clever. He's removed the lead character, so the emphasis is on the shark coming to get us next. And those four things the page does are all actively working together to build that horror. They're designed in unison. The progression without the simple vanishing point and repeated framing means the progression is more difficult to get across, and it means the final panel would have less impact if we didn't see the same frame repeated 4 times, now grabbing our attention directly by shifting the vanishing point. I like to see comics as having this very expansive toolset, things that you can do on the page. Obviously it has its limits in terms of volume of tools, but it's like a cookbook at the end of the day. You can take a handful of these tools and concoct something totally new, totally original, full of flavour and taste and spice and whatever else. And this is what Ito shows here. He takes a handful of tools that by themselves may not be scary or fear-inducing, but by balancing them all together, he manages to bring us into the story, and make the fear as real as can be on a 2-dimensional image on a piece of paper. I mean, if that isn't magic, what is? Thanks for watching. This episode was, as always, made possible by the patrons at patreon.com/strictpanelnaked. For their support, they get brand new exclusive content every single week from me too. Check it out if you'd like to support the channel and see some new writing. You can get my comics magazine at panelxpanel.com, and I'm on Twitter at HassanOE. Finally, hit subscribe and that notification bell to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and I'll see you next time.